Hello and welcome to the Football Debate, where we take the controversial topics in the world of football and have a wee chat and try and make some sort of argument or draw some sort of conclusion.
Not that controversial, really.
It's not particularly, no. For this episode it will be, will MLS ever be Major League? That's a clever play on words.
So you've done there.
Yeah, basically, the MLS has the platform to have, it should have really have been bigger than it actually is by this stage, really, given the amount of exposure it should have being American.
You think so?
Well, I think so, yeah.
Well, I mean, like, you're trying to build a football culture from scratch, which is, I guess, pretty much exists everywhere else in the world, and not America. And you have 4 major sports already in America that have absolutely dominated since records began. I don't know, for a long time.
Before we get to the crux of the question, I think it's only fair we have a bit of background on the history of the league and how it came to be. It's formerly the North American Soccer League, the NASL, from 1968 to 1984, and then Major League Soccer was established in 1996 after US Soccer, in exchange for FIFA giving them the World Cup in 94. US Soccer said, fine, we'll form our own professional league. And in 1996, the MLS was born, featuring 10 teams, and it had a lot of the major stars from the 94 World Cup from the American team, like your Eric Ronaldo's, Tony Meola. As well as that, they had some of the biggest names in South American football, like your Carlos Valderramas and your Jose Campos, who is a cult hero of ours.
Yeah, he designed his own kits quite famously.
After the first season, the league sort of declined in popularity, mainly because the hype around it had finished, and because the majority, if not all of the teams, were playing in American football stadiums, so they're all huge stadiums. So there's a massive disconnect between the fans and the players on the pitch.
Well, there's a few reasons for that. I'm not sure I'm allowed to go into them yet, but I think it was quite gimmicky as well. It was sort of like, there was an episode of Renford Rejects, I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, where they get an American coach and they try and change the rules of football as they go. Like, they're playing a game, and during the match he's like, oh, and you should wear helmets and you should blah 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 and do this. And that early MLS is kind of like that. It is quite embarrassing, really.
Just on the subject of making up their own rules, what would happen if a game was drawn?
Well, draws in American sports culture is almost a dirty word, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have tiebreakers and also, NFL and all sorts. And in the case of a draw in the early MLS, they had a penalty shot. It was akin to an ice hockey penalty shot where you take a run up the goalkeeper, and then you do. I don't know exactly when it was supposed to end, but you have a one-on-one with the goalkeeper basically, which is really quite unique. It is worth watching.
Oh yeah,
but definitely not worth doing.
No, just take the point.
But that's the one thing about everyone's supposed to love about football, really. Well, not supposed to love about it, but the one thing most people do love about football is so accessible, and you can go anywhere in the world, put a couple of jumpers down and play football, and that's, it's simple enough. Whereas once you start trying to invent your own rules as a league, not in terms of who you can pick and who you can buy and whatever, more in terms of how the actual sport occurs, I think you've got problems.
Yeah,
because you're essentially not selling them football, you're selling them something else.
After that, the league went through another resurgence after the 2002 World Cup, because of America's performance in that. And then between 2003 and 2008, there were 6 specific soccer-specific stadiums built.
I think that was the start of the change in culture to a football culture that we would recognise. Having soccer-specific stadiums as well takes away. There are quite a lot of early MLS games, and you might have seen this with clips of old MLS games. There's NFL lines on the pitch. You can't tell where the ball goes out. It's embarrassment, really.
Even up till about 5 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, New England Revolution sometimes still.
Yeah, Gillette Stadium.
Like, there's still Patriot marks on the ground.
Yeah, it's so, like, it's real, like, hurts the eyes, it really does. And I imagine that put a lot of people off.
It does. It puts me off with Hull now when I see rugby lines on the Hull pitch. I just think, don't bother.
The league also expanded to include more clubs. So there's 20 teams now, including Canadian clubs.
But one of the biggest factors as well in the league having a sort of bigger explosion is soccer cities. cities with culture, history of soccer, NASL teams like Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, who already had established fan bases, and they were playing in the new NASL, with 20,000, 30,000 people at these games that are essentially irrelevant. They're not even really competitive football matches. And that's the fan culture that was there already, and that's organic, you can't force it. And that's really important when you're trying to establish a new franchise. Kill me. But yeah, it is important because you have your own traditions, whether it be cutting a big log like Portsmouth do, or Portland do every time they score a goal, or Seattle have their Saunders. It goes all the way back to the 1970s, and
are they the Revs firing off muskets?
Well, that's that's something.
As of 2016, there were a total of 20 active teams, with 4 expansion teams to come into the league over the next 2 seasons. There's 2 to come in next year. There's Los Angeles and Atlanta. That's it.
But this is going to continue as well. So this again is going to become quite an Americanized format of maybe we'll keep expanding, maybe 30, 40 teams. And then there are teams that don't play each other, like in the NFL, you're putting in different conferences and you might not play each other. And I think that's difficult as well, because you build up like organic rivalries with teams, and if you don't play a team for 2 years, it might keep it special, but it also might dilute it a little bit.
Yeah. Just on the subject of the conferences, the format of the MLS season, if you don't kind of do your research into it, it's quite confusing, I'd say. But then again, that seems to be the thing in American sports. It's like you don't just have a set number of teams, you play each other twice. Done.
It is confusing as well. I think it's also confusing the way it's covered sometimes. With MLS coverage, a lot of different people try and go by the conferences, when really, if you go by the league table, you can see who's getting into the playoffs and who isn't. Yeah. But that's sort of put to the back burner for a little bit, just to see who's winning the Eastern Conference and who's winning the Western Conference. It is quite diluted. It's a bit silly, I find.
Well, the regular season runs from March to October, and then after that, teams are divided into the Eastern and the Western conferences. So then they play 34 games. Each team plays 34 games in an unbalanced schedule. So there's 24 matches against teams within their own conference, and then 10 games against teams from the other conference.
It's not fair as well.
No, it's really
if you're playing different teams, that's not a fair competition.
Especially when one of the conferences is significantly weaker than the other.
We've seen it so many times in recent years. The Western Conference teams finish what, if you combine the league, would be 6 of the top 8, 7 of the top 9. A lot of times, things like that.
A good 7 or 8 points.
So then, a lot of times, the 2 best teams are in the Western Conference, and then they play each other in the Western Conference final. Or maybe even, because it's a cup competition, anyone can win basically at that point.
Yeah, because after that then you're split. The team then with the highest points total is awarded the Supporter Shield, which is essentially like the league title.
It's the league,
it's the league title. After that, all of the teams who finish in the playoffs go into the playoffs. Then they play each other, but the teams who finish top of the conferences get a bye into the conference final.
Yeah.
So that after that,
so you play less. You play less games in the postseason if you finish higher, and then you get seeding. You don't go straight into the conference final, you go straight into the conference semi-final?
Oh, yes, because there's a playoff, then it's semis, then it's the...
Yeah, so you go straight into the conference semi-finals, and then the other teams play their way into the playoffs, essentially the ones that finished in the fringe. I think they used to call them wild card spots, didn't they?
And then the higher you finish, if you get home advantage, don't you?
Yeah.
And then
that actually carries on. Although this is complicated, because you get the home advantage, but you have to win the first tie, which is 2-legged, and you play the first game away from home.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's an advantage or not, no one can agree on. Would you rather have the second leg at home or second leg away? It depends what kind of team you are. Do you play on the counter? Do you apply pressure up the field?
Do you play on real grass or on turf?
These are all factors. So you're playing for an advantage, but is it an advantage? You get nothing for finishing first, as far as I'm concerned. That's my honest opinion. Victor Lass here won the Supporters' Shield. No advantage whatsoever. They play against Seattle away and at home. If it was a one-off tie and FC Dallas playing at home, there's an advantage. But they're going straight away to probably what is the hardest place to play in the MLS, It's Seattle Sounders. They lost. They lost the first leg 3-0. It's over. They won the Supporters' Shield, and they're basically out before the second leg of their playoff,
despite finishing top of the conference.
And so they got nothing for it. I obviously win the game.
There's a lot of people even involved in the league who say that this renders the regular season completely.
It absolutely does. There's no argument. Finishing the top half of a league is not much of an achievement.
No.
It's not an achievement that should be rewarded. It isn't. It shouldn't be rewarded. It's not that impressive. It might be impressive once you get to 48 teams or whatever, if that's, if you're talking like the other major league sports in America. But once we get to that stage, God knows what we're dealing with. So
because as well as that, there's no promotion or relegation in American soccer, because the division below that is the USL.
Yeah, USL, NASL, and then but they are almost unrelated. It's absolutely it's a bizarre system. This was crucial to the development of the league, to have a closed league so that the improvement could grow and grow, and you could attract more players, and it's guaranteed contracts and everything like that. That was really important at the start. Now there's an argument which we might be getting into later, I presume, about promotion and relegation coming in now.
So unlike most, if not all, major leagues in Europe and just around the world in general, the transfers in the MLS are a little bit difficult to get your head around as well. One of those rules being the designated player rule.
Can I just say, before we get into that, the league essentially buys players for you.
Yes.
So that's complicated.
It's in regards to, there's a... And it depends who owns your rights.
If the league sells a player on your behalf, at your behest, then that means that you have the rights to those players if they ever come back to the league. On occasion, sometimes not, sometimes so.
It's very odd. But this rule, it allows there's a salary cap essentially in MLS. So it's like in rugby league, you have a certain amount of money you can pay for wages, and you can't go over that at all. There's also like other little caveats, like how many international players you can have, how many homegrown players you have to have. But for designated players specifically, they are treated outside of that salary cap. So you can have 3 players who get paid whatever. Like there's no real kind of limit on what they can get paid outside the salary cap. It was to attract a higher caliber of player, or like veterans in their weight, who have a bit of star power.
No, this one we've talked sort of about the individual factors of each, and mostly negative a lot so far. Designated players were an overwhelmingly positive contribution to the league.
Absolutely.
They attracted more players, they raised the standard of play, they attracted more fans, everything about it was positive.
And it added a level of legitimacy, I guess, because it's affectionately known as the Beckham rule, because it came in, it was, when he came in, it referred to the anticipation of teams signing lucrative deals with big name players. So Beckham came in, you had Cuauhtémoc Blanco at the time, Juan Pablo Angel, now you've got players like David Villa, Pirlo,
those are massive.
Giovinco.
Those are massive markets as well when you talk about Blanco and Angel, looking at it from that point of view, which don't really like to. But, when you consider like Cuauhtémoc Blanco is an absolute icon of Mexican football, and the Mexican population is so huge in the United States, and
they're a rabid football fan base.
Yeah, exactly. It's the main sport. So,
in regards to player recruitment, specifically in regards to youth players, in Europe and around the world, the majority of it would be done through the academies or through scouting or whatever. But for the MLS, the majority of that's done through the Super Draft.
Well, majority, not so much now. Certainly over the historically, there's a lot of homegrown players coming in now through the academy system. It's a really huge developing area, but previously, the draft was pretty much where everyone got all their new players, and the league's organised in such a way that the lower you finish, the higher draft picks you get, the more allocation money you get in an attempt to make the league more competitive, which is a good system. It's a really good system, and it works because that league has been so competitive for so many years. And usually when a team's not competitive, it's because they've made some really, really bad choices. So it is a really good system for parity, and again, that's another really positive factor. And has the league been growing? Yes. for that.
Yeah.
But the draft is really odd because for those of us who aren't of an American persuasion, the excitement is almost baffling for a draft.
Yeah, because the Super Draft is specifically for college players, or university players, who have been signed. They've been signed by the league,
Yes.
but they haven't been assigned to a team yet.
College football in America, NFL college football, is watched by 100,000 people every week in like half the places around America. It's crazy. The fandom's crazy. So when people are being drafted into the NFL, more or less everyone knows who the stars are. They've seen them play at what is quite a high level, and they know exactly what they're getting into. With the MLS draft, there's a similar level of detail about these players available, but it's really hard because there's not as much tangible evidence as to how they're going to do in the league.
The only real kind of insight you can get is through the combine, which is like a 2 or 3 day.
Yeah,
kind of.
We have sort of equivalents here where people play trial games against each other, which is similar. So all the potential draft picks play against each other in a big old game, or loads of games actually.
So you can see, so people can kind of get a grasp on who to keep an eye out for and stuff. And then as well as that, you have the supplemental draft, which is every year each team has to select a roster of players they want to keep, and anyone who's not on that roster is put into like a free agency pool.
And usually you end up, it's 11 players you can protect, so usually you end up having basically some key players, because everyone knows that, a squad is usually at least 14 players that feature every week. A lot of times, some players, star players, are left unprotected at the behest of this rule, where eventually, I can only speak for FC Dallas when I say that they had an MLS Cup final team and then lost half of the starters from it the next season from the draft because they couldn't protect all the players they wanted to protect. And that's the thing, when you have such a good squad, as teams will do if they're going to do well, then it is it's good for parity, but that to me is bizarre.
It is very strange.
I don't think it doesn't seem very fair, because you reap the rewards for developing talents, and then suddenly you're subject to someone else taking them.
So each of the Super Draft and the Supplemental Draft are split into 4 rounds, so every team has 4 chances to pick a player, essentially. And throughout the draft you can trade your place in the draft for allocation money.
Anyone who's familiar with American sports will know this process. But for people who aren't familiar with American sports, you basically watch the film Draft Day with Kevin Costner, because it's bad. But it'll give you a good insight into it. A lot of times you're trying to outwit people with trading numbers and saying, oh, well, that team might pick so-and-so, so I'm going to give that so-and-so to another team because I'm worried about them having so-and-so, etc. So it's quite interesting.
It's interesting, but from trying to get into the league, I imagine that would really kind of like, what? People are looking at like, what the hell is going on? Because you can trade your position for places in next year's draft as well.
3 years.
Or 3 years down the line. It's bizarre.
You can trade them for players. You can trade anything for anything, basically. A lot of times a player will move for 2 draft picks.
I know, because it's not really transfer fees.
Yeah, and sometimes here, players are an asset more than anything else. Whereas you can have things basically that are more tangibly assets, like draft picks and stuff, because you've got a certain amount of room and a certain salary cap. So instead of a player being making demands, the player's subject to whatever the club wants, basically.
So the question of this episode is, will Major League Soccer ever kind of rise to the heights of, say, the big leagues in Europe? So in regards to TV coverage, for specifically in the US and Canada, there are 8 broadcast stations that have MLS games. So ESPN, Fox, Unimas in Spanish. And they have a set number of games that they can broadcast per season. So each of them, I think, there's ESPN and Fox have 34 games each, and then Unimas, for the Spanish-speaking audience, have another 34. And so it's being seen, at least. Well, it's given the opportunity to be seen.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one metric of measuring how well it's doing.
Purely domestically. Yeah.
Domestically. Now, audience, that is not scratching the surface of the kind of TV audiences the other sports, the other major sports in America get. Not close. But, attendance-wise, you're talking a huge average. Like a really impressive average across America. It's the fifth most attended sport in Canada and the USA combined.
Which is incredible.
And it's the fourth most attended sport.
That's higher than the NBA and the NHL, by the way.
Yeah, the average attendance is 21,692, which is, if 21,000 people are going to, that is on par with a lot of top European leagues.
If they're going to each game, 21,000 people per game.
That is very, very close to the likes of Serie A, which, fair enough, isn't a well-attended league, but it's not a well-attended league mostly because the stadiums are 70 years old and crumbling, and they fit 60,000 people in, and 20,000 people are going. Now, when you look at the MLS, there's a lot of demand for teams where 20,000 is the capacity, or 15,000 is the capacity, and they're selling out every week, so that's...
There's a lot of parallels there with Serie A and old MLS at least, where big stadiums with not enough people to fill it.
Yeah, the funny thing is, I think a lot of Serie A's problems are families are sort of scared to go, like it's not really a welcoming atmosphere and things like that, whereas MLS are scoring big in those demographics. Like if you go, I think families are who they're marketing towards the most, and it really works because I think you have to grow a soccer culture, because most of the older generation of America is, you know, we've all seen coverage of soccer, American coverage of soccer from 10 years, 20 years ago. It's positive.
It's not positive at all. No. In regards to viewership on these specific channels, there's TSN also in Canada, which for the English and French speaking audiences.
And they have three teams.
Three teams, Toronto, Vancouver and Montreal. But for this season alone, for viewership, it's you're getting about 312,000 people per game on ESPN and about 284,000 on Fox. Over 34, at least the minimum of 30 telecasts each.
I think it's interesting because that's less than the Premier League's getting on NBC. Now, one of those reasons is the NBC coverage is fantastic, and Fox Sports coverage is not fantastic. That's one of the main reasons. I think if you can sort of develop personalities on TV, it helps people watch. Casual viewers are drawn in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit gimmicky, I understand that, but it works for a lot of time. And then it's just so slick, and they've got every Premier League game on demand over there as well, which is, I don't think I'd ever leave.
Plus as well, they're, if you're just getting into football or soccer, the Premier League is presented as the kind of pinnacle of what you should be watching to get into. So I guess more people will be interested in watching this supposed pinnacle of the sport as opposed to their own league.
And then as well, you've got how much of the population is, a result of immigration, and then you have people from Italian American families who are watching Juventus or any of the Italian clubs. So you have the Spanish fans who are watching Liga MX, Spanish Mexican fans who are watching Liga MX. You have all sorts from everywhere watching all other leagues and not MLS.
Yeah. Which is weird because within that there is opportunity to get back to your sort of roots for a lot of the Italian American fans. There's two New York teams as well.
Yeah.
Well, there's one New York team, one in New Jersey. So there are ties to be had with these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we mentioned on the previous episode about New York making a better connection with the area, and that's the kind of connections these people need to be making. That's the first thing. Attendance is the first thing. TV's the second thing. It doesn't really matter if MLS makes an impact worldwide. It doesn't. It's irrelevant. You have to make an impact at home. And there are two metrics for measuring that. Attendance, they are doing. People are going to games. Brilliant. TV, they're not doing well. They could do more. Present it in a better way. Make it feel like it's a big spectacle. And then anything else is about the Premier League. Yes, right, worldwide appeal, but the Premier League was special to us before 2004 before the markets exploded and it was the biggest thing in the world. It was special to people in the 80s before it was called the Premier League. That's not what does it. It's fan culture. It's prestige. Those things grow. You can't just give them to a sport or a league.
So we've discussed all of the major talking points, so now I guess it's time to kind of really give our sort of opinion and discuss it between the two of us on a personal level. Preventing people getting into the league, there are quite a few roadblocks in the way. Like the complicated way that the league is organised, I think, is the main thing preventing new fans getting into the league.
I don't think the MLS though is for the people they're trying to attract to the sport aren't us. The people they're trying to are already familiar with these rules because it's in the sport but that's not the way of doing it. That's not the way of attracting those people, in my opinion, because those people are already getting those rules, that layout, that format. So why would they look for it somewhere else?
Why would they think it's odd? Yeah.
And especially if so many people are watching the Premier League over there, then they're getting a system that they fully understand. It's simple enough. If they're watching La Liga, which just gets huge audiences over there, absolutely massive audience. Then they're going to be asking why this, why that. But it's just fine. But it's not. They shouldn't be looking to attract us. We are irrelevant. Our opinion is irrelevant. They should be looking to attract North American fans first and foremost.
So the main discussion points I brought into this to round off this episode, sort of revolve around the way that American sports, the rules within American sports work. But you've just said there that they're not trying to appeal to us, so it shouldn't matter, really.
Yeah.
So it's things like the way the league is, the format of the league, the salary cap, no relegation or promotion, and the fact how other American sports do this sort of thing. It shouldn't matter to us.
Well, no, but these things are things. They're all the points you've made there are points that are relevant to will it grow as the league, because the idea of promotion relegation is to increase the competitiveness from top to bottom, because a lot of times teams are just consolidating. Especially sometimes teams are finishing lower in the NFL to get more money, and they're losing games on purpose essentially to try and get better. And that's the drawback of a rule like that. That's what you're gonna get. Teams are losing all the time, just thinking, well, what does it matter? We can't make the playoffs, so promotion relegation would help with that. And then, especially if you're getting to the level which I think they will go to in about 20 years, I expect them to have 40 teams in there. I genuinely do. I think that's the way it's going. If there's 40 teams, then you can make 2 leagues. Then you can have promotion and relegation. The other American sports they're competing with is a big factor, but
because those sports themselves are rooted in sort of American history. Like, was it baseball's America's pastime?
It is, but even baseball, and people seem to go out of habit rather than that. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be particularly that important. I mean, baseball's attendance has risen in the 90s because they had a steroid scandal, so maybe they should try just pumping American footballers, American soccer players rather, full of whatever they can find, turn them into superhumans, and then the MLS would definitely be amazing.
Oh, we'd all definitely watch
We'd all watch that. Everyone was just Hulk.
There is a comparison I'd like to draw there in that regard. The Super Bowl every year gets in the hundreds of millions of viewers every year, including people from outside of America. Like even people like here in the UK, where there's like maybe 2 American football games on every year,
which always sell out.
And people don't really understand the rules of American football, but they still watch it. But the MLS Cup final, no one really.
Here's an interesting point, because what you've touched on is quite curious, because I think a lot of the people that go to the NFL games or go for an experience, I don't know that many NFL fans, but I know a lot of people that go to these games. Now, it's more of an experience, it's a show. Football's not like that. You can't present football in that way. People watch the Super Bowl because it's a show. People don't watch the Champions League final because it's a show.
They watch it because they want to watch.
Yes, people would watch the Super Bowl regardless of whether it was between New England Patriots, who'd be a huge franchise, or someone like the Rams or whatever. You know, people will watch it regardless. It doesn't matter who's playing. They care more sometimes about the halftime show, the adverts. That is not the way that the MLS is going to appeal, because none of the other sports in America can match that as well. And the reason that that's so successful with NFL is because it stops all the time. So people are used to consuming that sport in that way. They couldn't have a Super Bowl. The NBA final isn't like the Super Bowl. It's a one-off. It could have been any sport that did it first. It was the NFL. The Super Bowl has years and years of history now. You're talking like Super Bowl 52 or something now. Like, it's years and years of established history. You're not competing with that. That's not the way to go. That's not the way to run a sports league. That's the way to run a TV show. It's not happening. Fan culture is the most important thing. Getting people to go to the games, then getting people to watch on TV. Those are the two critical things. Everything else is irrelevant. What people over here watch is irrelevant. Get it going there. Done. End of story. Is it going to be a major league? It's irrelevant.
That's a fine place to leave it there, I think, Ronan. Only time will tell, I suppose.
Fick to last till I die, lad.
Fick to last till he dies. So, from Ronan, I'm Brett. This has been the football debate. If you liked it, please do like, share, and subscribe. And
We'll see you down the road.
See you down the road. It was a bit better than last time.
You just replaced your notes with mine. Hey.
Hold on.
Hit it.
Hold on. Oh.
Hit it. Pivot.
Go on. Pivot.
Pivot.
It's
Yes.
in. It is in.
That's a goal.
That's a hilarious celebration, by the way.
That counts.
That's good. Who scored? Ibisevic?
It's
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
That's what JP was saying.
It's we're watching Hertha versus Mainz, by the way.
No, hold on. This might be another one.
Oh!
Hit it. Pivot. Pivot. Oh, he's the. Oh, that's another.
Oh wait, no, it's a replay.
That's a replay. Yeah.